Are you really able to tell what a person is thinking about by looking at their feet? Let's find out. Picture for a moment a scene in your mind. There's a gal sitting at a bar by herself and a guy approaches. Classic scene, right? Now the guy's talking to her and she is smiling, she is laughing, and everything seems to be going excellent for him. And then it comes time for the big question. He asks for her number and she says no. He's baffled, right? Why? Why would she say no? Everything looked promising. She wasn't folding her arms, she wasn't frowning at him, she was smiling, she was laughing, she seemed very open. Why couldn't he tell? What could he not see? And honestly, the entire problem with this entire idea is that he was looking from the waist up, which so many of us actually make that mistake. We make the mistake of, when we're observing, we only look from the waist up. We look at the hands, we look at the arms, we look at the eyes, we look at the face, we look at if they're frowning or if they're shrugging, etc. All of these are good. Don't get me wrong, they are excellent to observe. But one thing we always miss is to look from the waist down. For instance, why didn't he notice that her legs were crossed tightly? Why didn't he notice that she had been swinging her foot freely and then she suddenly stopped whenever he asked for the number? Why didn't he notice these things? Well, that's because he wasn't observing from the waist down. Now, before we get into the ideas and gestures of the waist down, of the legs and feet, we have to discuss something called a baseline. And what a baseline is how a person acts on an everyday basis. So when they're comfortable, when they're not stressed, when nothing's bothering them, how they gesture, how they move, their tics, their quirks, anything like that, that is a person's baseline. For instance, my baseline is I actually like to fiddle with my beard. It's there, I like touching it. Sue me. That is a baseline. Now, when somebody strays away from their baseline, it is usually for a specific reason. That could either be a positive or a negative reason, and I call these reasons spikes. So if somebody strays away, for instance, say somebody likes to twirl their hair. I have no hair to twirl. But say a lady likes to twirl her hair, and she does it commonly, and that's just what she does. And then when something stressful enters her life, she suddenly stops twirling her hair and puts her hands down. That is called a spike. It's a negative spike. That stressor entered her life, and she put her hand down in order to have better control over her body. In the same way, I have the tendency to bounce my feet when I sit. I'm a drummer. Drummers do that. They tap, they bounce. They can't help it. It's just what they do. And so I'm usually doing that. And it would be unaverage of me to suddenly just stop and not bounce my feet anymore. That's probably because a stressor came into my life and something altered what we were doing, what I was thinking, what I was feeling, etc. So with that in mind, with a baseline in mind, a basic understanding of what a baseline is, we're going to go ahead and dive into the tells of the feet, the gestures that the feet can give off, and the emotions that might be residing behind that. Okay, so the first gesture that we're going to be looking at is called the bounce or tap. This is the most commonly seen gesture that's out there. Close second is the one that's following that we'll discuss in a second, but the most commonly seen gesture is the bounce or tap gesture. And you can see this anywhere basically where there's going to be boredom. You can see this. So for instance, if you want to go to a DMV, to a courtroom, to I don't know, a piano recital, anywhere where there's boredom. Classroom is excellent. I have gone lots of years to a college classroom, too many years. But you could see this gesture, and it's very, very easy to see. What it is when a person is sitting, and you see them begin to bounce their foot on the ball of their foot. So you'll see their entire leg moving up and down. Some people will do this one foot, some people will do this both feet. Either way, their legs are moving, okay? What this gesture can mean on the negative side of the things, because there's a positive and a negative every time. On the negative side, this means that they are bored, they are distracted, they are impatient, they are frustrated, irritated, etc. Now, keep that in mind. While you're looking at this, as you see their feet bouncing, remember, don't make a judgment and be like, oh no, they're bored, or they're frustrated, or they're irritated, or they disagree, or anything like that, because you haven't seen the rest of the body. In order to better observe the rest of the body, that will make it to where you can actually have a better read off of the actual tell itself. Now, say for instance, that same person is sitting in their chair, and they're just relaxing. There, no movement, no unaverage gestures, etc. Their baseline is happening, and then something happens. Somebody says something confrontational, or you're speaking, or the speaker's speaking, and something comes up, and then they suddenly lean back in their chair, fold their arms, and then start bouncing their foot. That is call this a grouping cluster, a gesture cluster, and with that gesture cluster, you could probably assume that they disagree, or that they're frustrated. Another time that you could see this particular gesture group would be in class. I would see it often. Students would be studiously writing notes and paying attention to the professor, and as the hour drug on, or the 2 hours sometimes if it was really miserable, then you would begin to see their legs begin to bounce. And this particular gesture, same one as the one before, it was still just a bounce off the ball of the foot, the leg moving up and down. But this one meant that they were impatient. They were ready for the class to be done because boredom had set in. So impatience and boredom. But keep in mind, just because their foot is bouncing, it doesn't mean that they are upset, or they're bored, or they're frustrated, or impatient, or anything like that, because, frankly, it could also be good. And what I mean by that is, say, you're sitting in a coffee shop, and you see a guy sitting at a table by himself, just sitting there, I don't know, reading a newspaper. Do people do that? Yeah, let's just say he was reading a newspaper. So he's sitting there reading a newspaper, and the door to the coffee shop opens, the bell rings, and he looks up, and a young woman walks in, and his legs automatically start bouncing, and he smiles broadly, and he gets up and gives her a hug, and, it's obvious that they're dating, okay? So that is another tell where it's the same gesture, but it's for a positive reason. Basically, the bounce gesture is just simply meaning that the brain is firing. That's all that it means. It doesn't mean that they're sad. It doesn't mean that they're happy. It just means that the brain is firing. What you have to find out if they're sad or happy is judging off of the rest of their body. What does the rest of their body look like? What is the rest of their body telling you? You have to observe in context. I can never stress that enough. Context, okay? So, with that in mind, that is just the first little tell, the bouncing tell, closely related to the bounce, which is off the ball of the foot, is the tap, which is the exact same gesture, but just the only thing moving is the foot, and the hinge point is the heel, so that is literally when somebody taps their foot. You would do it to music, anything like that. Once again, same story as with the bounce. You have to observe in context. What does the rest of their body tell you, in order that you might be able to tell what the tap means. And that's just one little section of what the feet can tell you.